Mr. Stone, Father Clark.
Thank you. This is Greg Stone, and I'm with Father Jim Clark here at St. John's Seminary in Camarillo. This is October the 7th, and this is the fourth episode in this series on conflict resolution, on peace in the parish and beyond. Today, we're going to take up apology and forgiveness after we start with our prayer.
Oh, good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of forgiveness. We thank you for allowing us to live in the freedom of your love and for the gift of your life. We pray that we may have the courage and the humility to learn and to practice forgiveness in all aspects of our life, that we might live in this freedom, this life, and this love that you desire. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about apology and forgiveness, which is a large topic. It's covered in chapters 16 and 17 in the book Taming the Wolf. But what we'll do is we'll go through the key points of the topic and look at it from various angles. Apology is, in the way it's treated in the conflict resolution work that we're approaching here, is we take a little different approach and we look at how does apology satisfy the needs of the harmed party. And so what we do is we move away from the apology, which we often feel that we know what it is, and we say, I'm sorry, and then we become very upset when the other party doesn't really hear what we meant, or maybe they do and it's not acceptable because we haven't met their needs. So that's going to be the approach that we'll take today. I recommend downloading the PowerPoint because there's a selection where you can pick the notes. On the notes you'll see the errors that we can make. So it's a check sheet really for anyone to use. On the slide will be the positive actions we can take, and then in the notes section will be the errors that we might make. And this is laid out as a check sheet because I think the most valuable use of this material will be in counseling others, and where you see in the parish or with a parishioner involved in an outside conflict, where you see it's hung up on this area of apology. And this provides a practical, a way of going about it, a process and a structure. Forgiveness we'll take up, and that's often brought together with apology. And as we'll discuss later, they are not contingent upon one another. However, typically we do find them linked in the process of apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Now, as we go through this, we'll see that these tools regarding apology and forgiveness can be used at any point in the process. They may be needed to actually convene the process. There may need to be a concession in which one person offers, or both parties offer, mutual apologies, maybe for how they behaved during the conflict. And so it may start at that level, and then we build as we get into the substantive issues of the conflict. Harm may have been done before. We may need to get deeper into apology. So we'll go through that whole range of applications. In the first slide, what we were talking about must satisfy needs. And so as a coach in this, we really want to ask what needs are not being satisfied. What does the harmed party need? And so the first thing that happens is an apology shows respect. It demonstrates a certain degree of humility, and it lifts the other up. It uplifts the other. In a sense, we bow to the other in an apology. We lower ourselves, and this lifts them up. And this restores their dignity. Because often when a party has been harmed, either leading up to a conflict or in a conflict, they've been robbed of their dignity. Basically, harm done to them says that they have no value or little value. And so that we reverse the invalidation that took place. By invalidation, I mean the ways in which we made little of that person or made nothing of them. So we're shifting the focus to them, we're lifting them up, we're sending a signal that we do respect them. And this is key to moving the process forward. Now, we can fail in terms of if we maintain an attitude of superiority, if we don't really show respect, we just toss off an apology like, yeah, okay, fine, I'm sorry. It doesn't really show that respect, and that need is not met, and you'll see that in the party, the harmed party. I'm using that term, though we find in most conflicts, both parties have been harmed and both have transgressed. So it's not a simple one party is an offender, one party is the harmed party, but we can use that model for, at any one point, talking about the party who feels that they suffered harm. The other thing an apology does is it offers an expression of concern. It demonstrates to the other party that we recognize their suffering, we get it, and that we feel what they feel. And in a sense that promises we will not cause more pain. Because if we're feeling their pain now, that's uncomfortable, and we don't want to feel that again. So there's this whole empathy that's conveyed with a good apology. We can fail in this area by just failing to communicate that we understand the severity of their pain. If we belittle or under acknowledge how they felt, it can come across as not meeting their needs.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stone. Speaking about apologies, you're still on page 1 of your PowerPoint.
Oh, we've been flipping, so...
No, you must be viewing privately. So, pardon me, but you're still presenting page 1.
Okay, does that mean that we're not presenters?
No, you are a presenter, but right now you're only presenting page 1.
Okay, now let's scroll through.
You're still showing page 1.
Okay, then we must not...
You must be viewing privately.
Okay, how do we change that?
Do you see a tab on the top center to take over as presenter?
Well, it just has this... Okay.
Yes, there it is.
There it is.
Could you flip through to a few pages? No.
Go to it again and then hit the second one. There we go now.
Nope. There you go. Yes. Okay. You're moving.
Thank you, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Any technical flubs, please let us know.
That's okay. I had sent you a parenthetical message at 1:31, but that was okay. So, sorry for the interruption.
Okay.
As you talk about apologies, and I will mute myself.
Okay, thank you. So we were talking about apology offers an expression of concern, empathy, that they feel our pain. A way that we can fail at this is to question their pain. Like, really? That really upset you? You were hurt by that? And in that, they get the feeling that we don't really understand it. So we have to be cautious in terms of how we coach people to present that. An apology expresses acceptance of responsibility. This is an important area. It communicates that we accept being cause. It signals that we seek to gain control over our actions. And this tells the other party, it signals that we can control whether the harm will be repeated, and we promise that it won't. In some cases, you'll find an apology includes a denial of responsibility, like, the devil made me do it. I wasn't responsible for my own actions, things just happen. That's not satisfactory to the harmed party, because if they don't know that you control your actions, well, it just might happen again. And so that's one way that we can fail in an apology is deflecting blame, saying someone else did it, saying I had no control, and failure to really understand how our actions can cause harm. So that's an important part of the apology. An apology expresses regret for violating the moral grain of the universe. what it does is it communicates to the other party that we have a moral perspective. We realize that there is right and wrong in the world. And when we communicate that, we do know that there's right and wrong, it gives them comfort because they know that there's some standard, there's some measure that we will be confronted with in our future actions. And if, on the other hand, we deny all morals, we deny the moral ground of relationship, if that's the message that we're sending, the party is going to be very wary about accepting this. We see this at a huge, huge level in the culture right now, where there's not only a lack of understanding of the moral grain of the universe, but there's basically an attack on that concept. Did you want to say something?
No, that's good.
Yeah. And so as a culture, we see this as a problem in terms of where are we going as a society, as a world in the future, if we don't have a compass. And so this plays a big role. And as we export this into the culture, I think we can make a difference in people understanding how important it is to have the comfort of knowing that people have an understanding of the moral grain of the universe. The apology also signals to the offender, signals that we, the offender, seek forgiveness. It's a request. It was a fellow student of mine at Pepperdine who brought this up from Germany. And he saw apology as very much a request, take away my guilt. So we express in a humble way, we demonstrate humility that says, I'm burdened with this, will you take this away? And at first, we look at that and we think, well, okay, will that work? It seems like we're more interested in getting rid of our guilt than working with the harmed party. That can be the case, and that would be an error. However, sometimes we don't realize that when we request help from the other, we are honoring them. We are showing them a certain respect, a heightened respect when we say, I'm suffering under this burden, can you help me? And that reverses that loss of dignity and helps us out. Another need that's satisfied is apology expresses a willingness to make amends. So we're saying, hey, we're willing to restore the balance. We're willing to make the world right again. We're willing to offer restitution. Failure to do that can cause suspicion, can cause people to think, well, you're not really sincere in this if you don't really want to make up for the damages done. The other thing is we can make restitution to the wrong party. We have a legal system which has some positive aspects to it in terms of the harmed party in criminal cases is the state. It's not the individual. There are reasons why there's advantages to that, but sometimes the restitution paid to the state doesn't work as an apology, doesn't work as balancing the scale with the harmed party. Apology removes insult from injury. When we harm someone, when we assault their dignity, we cause a face loss, we cause a loss of respect, and there's an emotional injury that goes with that, and this is the insult that goes with it. So this is a tricky area to coach the parties, because often the party who's been insulted, who's lost face, doesn't necessarily want to admit that. Because if they admit that, if they say, yeah, okay, I was, there was lost face in this and so on, that's an additional loss of face. So more often, they're more likely to go, nah, no big deal. But you, as the pastoral counselor, will want to make sure you don't overlook that. Because if there is that insult that isn't addressed, even though it's denied, it will sit there, and later in the process, it'll jump up. And so it's really worth being aware of that. And as a mediator, that's one of the things you can do is choreograph. How can someone apologize for the insult that they that they gave without causing the other party additional face loss. Apology signals a desire to reconcile. It signals a change of heart. It says, my relationship with you has value. And it says, you as a person are valued enough for me to step up to the table here and sit with you and work through this. So that apology, and this is one way that an apology can help in convening. It's just a gesture that may say, okay, you have value, whereas the person may have figured this party does not value me at all. They're just going to continue to trample on me. They're going to continue to take my dignity away. And so I don't want to come to the table. So this apology signals, I do have a desire to sit with you. I value you enough to go through this. You can make an error in this is if you demand acceptance of the apology. In other words, there has to be, okay, I'm going to make this apology, but you have the free will to reject it if you want. So it's not a demand, it's an offer. That's important. It's a request. Apology also promises, and this is maybe the core. We see this theme repeated over and over again when we satisfy these needs, is an apology promises harm will not be repeated. This is huge, because before you accept an apology, you want to know, am I just going to go through the same suffering that I did before? So it signals that the transgressor has gained control once again, and expresses remorse and concern. What this does is this is offsetting that fear of, have I run into a sociopath who really can't understand my emotions? And because he can't understand my emotions, it's going to happen over and over again. There's no emotional connection to what's taken place. And the harmed party wants to know, is that the case? Or is this a situation that came about in the fallen world, and we can repair it and we can reconcile? So one way to fail on this, to make an error, is to show no remorse. Right away they're going to think, maybe I'm dealing with someone who doesn't understand human emotions, and who is so harmed, wounded, in such a state that they just can't duplicate the harm that they're causing. And people feel threatened by that, and they may move away. So that's something to keep an eye on. Is that a factor in the situation that you're counseling? Apology acknowledges free will. It shows an understanding that actions are a matter of choice, not just chance, and it's an expression of self-control. This gets into some of the models. This gets into the moral grain of the universe. It gets into the idea that we're endowed with free will. If we basically come to the table and say, I have no choice, it's just my biological makeup, and that's just what determines my actions. We get into biological determinism. Then this becomes frightening for the harmed party, because they have no reason to think that this person will control themselves in the future. So they have to build up walls of protection. In the last one, in terms of free will, you have situations where sometimes there's a legal apology delivered by a lawyer in front of the cameras and so on. And that also addresses or brings up the question of, is this apology a matter of free will, or is this, I have to do this in order to satisfy the court or the public or some other entity, so that it's an apology made under duress or coercion. Apology promotes spiritual growth. It restores the relationship with God, in that we restore the loving relationship with our brother. And it opens the door to repentance. As we apologize, we start to accept, to a small degree or to a large degree, the idea that we can transgress. And we come to the realization that we do need to align our will with God's will in terms of how we treat our brothers. And these are things that we need to address. And so it ends up being a part of the spiritual journey. I see this even in secular mediations, where someone will go through this process, the difficult process of making an apology and unburdening past transgressions, and there'll be very interesting transformation. While that might appear to be quite separate from the deal making and so forth, it turns out it may be the most important thing that happens in a mediation, that personal growth, that spiritual growth. Now, of course, we can fail to recognize that this whole process takes place within the context of a divine relationship with God and with our brother, with that dual axis model that we started with. And if there's a failure to examine our conscience, that can also booby trap this kind of apology. An apology explains why things happened. This might be overlooked, easily overlooked. It helps restore reality, reduces confusion, reduces the sense of unreality, and increases certainty for the harmed party. Why is that? Why is that so important? And it is very important in this process. We typically do not see ourselves, our reality as we go through life. Typically, we do not see that we are a person who should be harmed. And so when harm takes place, when we're attacked, when we're ridiculed, when our dignity is ripped away from us, when there's physical harm or harm of emotional or psychological harm, it doesn't compute. And a person who's been harmed really suffers in terms of finding reality, because it's unreal to them. It's like, this is not supposed to be happening. And so they go into a confusion and they start spinning around in terms of what's real, what's right, how is the world supposed to work? And you can see this where a person who's been harmed really seeks, they need, and you see the relief when the person who gave harm says, you know what, here's what really happened. You know, when this event took place, here's what I was thinking. And maybe I was confused, but I thought I needed to do this. Maybe I was driven by fear, but you know, when so-and-so said this about you, I just went off, I triggered, and suddenly the person is hearing the narrative that's telling them what happened with the other person. And now reality starts to take shape again. They go, oh, okay. And you'll see great relief as they get the facts of what occurred. And that's why it's so important in the process to go through that narrative account and find out what really did happen. And we can help people, you know, that relief of knowing that, you know, I'm not crazy, you know, something did happen here is of great value. Apology motivates confession. It parallels confession, the right of reconciliation. An apology may be light, but it may, as you go through the process, there may be some, they admit, you know, look, I need to apologize for this. This was not okay. This was a transgression. And that may start the ball rolling where there's a deeper examination of conscience. And you'll find or at least I've found, in the mediation process, is often it goes to a level of a deeper confession. It may be something that they haven't told others their whole life. It may be they're burdened with something that's just been weighing them down. Finally, they have someone to listen. And so this will happen in this situation. And I think Catholics, of course, are fortunate that we have the rite of reconciliation that leaves this door open. But for most of the world, that is not the case. And so if someone will find someone who will be there with them in a non-judgmental way and will hear that confession, it makes a huge difference. And here's the interesting thing is, so this isn't a need explicitly of the other party, and yet when a person goes through this, there is such a transformation that you bring let's say that you're in private session in caucus and someone goes through this unburdening process. When you come back together, you don't even, as a mediator, you don't even have to tell the other party what happened. They see the difference. They can see it, they can feel it, they know it. Creates an amazing change off this, and it's a wonderful lesson in terms of how the rite of reconciliation changes people, so they just go out in the world and they don't have to say anything. People see that they've changed. One of the things that we can do wrong as a pastoral counselor, as a mediator in this, is we can fail to listen close enough. Someone can start down this path, and if we're not really listening, if we're not sensitive to the body language, if we're not sensitive to what's going on, if we don't know when to listen, we can chop off. We can chop what was the beginning of a confession or an apology. So we have to not chop the process off. Apology opens the door to mediation. It can be a vital step in convening and bringing parties to the table. It provides safety, hope. I mean, if the other person is saying, hey, I'm sorry, okay, we need to work this out, but I'm sorry for the way I've been treating you during this conflict. I've been rude. I've been rather nasty and unapproachable, and I beg your forgiveness for that. Something the other person realizes, okay, there's some safety, there's some hope, we can go forward, and they're willing to sit down at the table. So that's an important part.
Greg, these are excellent ideas and understandings of apology, especially in light of living in a multicultural society and the closeness of a multicultural parish community, where you have different groups of people who are using parish facilities as well as at parish meetings. And oftentimes something as seemingly insignificant as a gesture can be completely misinterpreted and set into to motion a complete misunderstanding and therefore division not only between two people but two groups. So thank you. This is very, very helpful. The only thing I would add to this is that not only can this process be used between people who misunderstand each other, but I've also noticed that people tend to kind of major in certain means of expressing apologies, or call them different languages or dialects. So for example, some people don't believe the words I'm sorry,
right,
or please forgive me. They need restitution, or they need a genuine commitment to make specific amends that are agreed upon by both parties. And I think that's important, is to almost sometimes even ask someone, what will it take for you to recognize my apology as genuine, or what do you need from me to let you know that this won't happen again, and to listen to their side and to recognize that they too, ideally would, coming from their best place, would want there to be an authentic forgiveness and hopefully a reconciliation, so that, especially in a parish situation, there could be that continuing dynamic of right relationship.
Right, exactly. And what this list does is it helps the person who may be counseling them get to those questions.
Exactly, yeah.
And sometimes, like if I'm the person who's transgressed and there's a harm party, and they're a little afraid of me.
Yes.
Okay, and I say, what do you need? They're not going to hear it.
Yeah.
Whereas if a mediator or the pastor says, what would you need from Greg in order to feel comfortable about this? They're able to do it. There's not a threat of face loss. And so that happens. So what stops people from apologizing? Why do they not apologize? I think the main thing is that fear that they're dealing with someone who really isn't tracking, sociopath, psychopath, whatever you want to call it, evil. And so because they're not tracking, this is going to happen again. And so they're looking to the future, like what do I have to do to protect myself in the future? A reason that people typically don't apologize is they anticipate that they're going to lose face, they're going to destroy their self-image. They fear punishment. They fear not being forgiven, that what they did is unforgivable. Or maybe they just have the need to be right and they fear having to admit they were wrong. It could be a great fear. So what we're doing in this process is building that bridge. So we're taking a little bit at a time and taking the apology that can get us to the table, and then maybe as we start discussing things, the threat level goes down because we see that there is empathy, that there is a discussion to be had, and as mediators or priests in pastoral counseling, as we create more and more safety and remove the threat level, people are able to reach toward one another more and more.
I think that's another important point, is that process can't be rushed. And unfortunately, in this culture where efficiency and speed are valued so much, that very often we have to accept the fact that this is a process and not just a matter of, like say, an hour or two together, but it may be over a period of days or weeks where slowly this is unpacked and revealed at deeper levels of why it has struck this person or this party with such force and why they're so deeply offended. And to recognize that in our role, especially as pastoral leaders, that we're in a position of trust and people will listen to us, and we may be the only link to bringing them together to create this space of being able not only to give but to receive the apology.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I think the courts play a good role in terms of deal making and working with those factors, but for true transformative mediation, for the spiritual formation that can take place, the church really is the only place that's going to deliver this. So that's why it becomes so important that we find the process and structure and we make it known that this is what we do. We can address those concerns of yours. Hidden guilt. This is one I throw in and mention because you may get to a point where, okay, you've taken these steps and it's just not working. You're not really getting close enough to the apology, or there's a lot of emotion. That's why I say diffusing the bomb. You see that, okay, there's anger, and it just is not, it's not giving way to the less, what should we say, the stronger processes of doing this. And what you're usually dealing with when you're dealing with anger, rage, emotions that are out of control, is hidden guilt. And basically you realize that you're in a position as a pastoral counselor that you need to diffuse the bomb. You need to find out, okay, what is there that this person feels so guilty about that they must protect themselves at any cost. And so they'll use anger, they'll use emotion. And it's counterintuitive, but this is the main string to pull when the emotions are really flying, and it's a subtle technique. That's why it's diffusing the bomb. You have to pull the right wire off. You have to make sure you know the blue wire and the yellow wire and the red wire and know what they're connected to. And so you have to do some inspection of this case of a hardened heart and know, how do you get to the hidden guilt? Because this is projecting as anger at the other party. The other party is the guilty party, and I am just so outraged. And yet, it's what's happening inside. So that turning of that is a fairly sophisticated process. So we get to forgiveness. Forgiveness is, of course, the sweet spot of our faith. It's a transcendent gift from God. It's not something that's owed. It's not something that's earned. It's, you know, apology may start the process, but it's not like forgiveness is given in response to apology. It's not like a balancing of the scales. It's not. It is a divine gift, and it makes no sense. This is where we get into some interesting territory. Is forgiveness makes no sense. It's not rational. You can sit with someone and try and find a rational explanation for forgiveness, and you're not going to get there because it's not rational. We see Christ's forgiveness on the cross. We look at that. You're not going to understand that if you're locked just into the rational world. This is a supernatural perspective is needed to really understand this. I was giving a talk at a women's prison, and about 70 people at the talk. And I brought this up, and there was such a relief. I said, you know, I bet a lot of times you spend time at night just thinking about how can I make this work? How can I deserve forgiveness, or how can I forgive someone else? And I said, and you go on night after night after night, and you don't get a resolution. And all the heads were just nodding like it was this torture that was going on in terms of trying to find a rational way to forgiveness. And I said, no, that is not where it comes from. This is a gift from God. This is a gift of divine grace. And a calmness, a peacefulness fell over the room when they realized, oh, okay, I've been approaching this in the wrong way. Because forgiveness doesn't balance the scales. It's not about justice. And this is one reason the world can seem off, is this is where the divine breaks into our world and breaks this ongoing conflict that is the fallen world. So this is a very, very vital tool in what we're doing. So we work with people and get them to understand that to forgive is an act of will. Sometimes people feel like, you know, they're waiting for that warm, fuzzy feeling that's going to come. And I know once I get that warm feeling, and now I'll know it's time to forgive. No, it won't happen. This isn't a feeling that comes over you. It is an act of will. This is where we exercise our free will. We make a decision. It's a decision. I wrote in the book, it's almost that we jump and then we learn to fly. It's the kind of thing that we make that decision, I must forgive. And we take that step, and then we learn the process as we go. But it is an act of will.
Yeah, it's about release, about releasing ourselves, about releasing others, situations, so that we're not stuck in the past. I remember one wise woman said, when I choose not to forgive, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Exactly. It is, and we need to acknowledge our free will. In a sense, this goes back to, if we want to look at it from a mystical perspective, we go back to the Garden of Eden. And when we're trying to balance the scales, we're at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's not going to balance. It was like, that's why we were warned, that's not the tree whose fruit you need to eat. Over here we have the tree of life, and that's a very different tree. And that's where we find the sanctifying grace of forgiveness. And so this is a whole thing that the secular culture obviously misses. And I think until this is made part of the secular culture, we're going to see pretty rough times, because there's no way out of that endless circle of trying to balance the scales when they don't balance. What are the barriers to forgiveness? One of the things that we bump into is a desire for revenge. And so as a counselor, you're going to be watching for this, because it may not be, I mean, obviously there's the mafia revenge, and there's, Hollywood revenge. I don't know if you notice the number of films that are based on the theme of revenge. And in it, the hero must personally, by his own hand, exact revenge. And so you have these revenge dramas. But revenge does not work like in the movies. It continues on, and we suffer from our own acts of revenge. And the thing with the desire for revenge is it can become, let's go on to the next slide, it can become subtle. It can be kind of the thing where, yeah, okay, you know, we really want to forgive, but that revenge comes up in these images of like, well, if I could just get even, you know, there was a way that I could get even. And so it becomes subtle.
Yeah.
And we live with that burden. And so we need to get out of that spiral of revenge, because as we seek revenge, as we exact revenge, the other side goes, scales aren't balanced. Now I need to get back at you. And we see this. There's certain countries where the justice system broke down, like in Italy during the Second World War, Albania, where people could not count on justice, and they built cultures of revenge. And you really see that they spiral out of control.
I remember a woman who suffered from years of domestic abuse came to a wonderful insight, very liberating. She said, victimization is an event. To be a victim is a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that summarizes exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we'll get into that even more. So the downside to revenge is you carry the burden of guilt. You have low self-esteem because you're transgressing. You have remorse, and there's a spiral of retribution, and there's self-deception involved. You know what we really want? If we look back, what we really wanted was our own happiness, not their suffering. We make that mistake. We think, well, their suffering will bring me happiness. It doesn't. That's the error. So what we have to do is look for ways that we can restore our happiness rather than spiral downward. Diminished consciousness. This is something that is so prevalent in our society with the use of drugs and alcohol. And this is where maybe we're harmed and we want revenge, but our revenge is we will make nothing out of that person. We will blot that person out of our memory, out of our life. And so we put up this big black screen to blot them out. And now we've made nothing of them. However, we carry the black screen.
Exactly, yes.
So we've diminished our own consciousness. So we've buried the memory. We've used drugs, alcohol, whatever. But the wounds are still there.
Yes.
They're just behind a black screen. So they're in a place where they can fester and become the poison that you mentioned earlier. So that's another way that prevents us from getting into forgiveness. The other is a victim identity. This is what you mentioned. Very addictive, and it's endowed with a false value. It's, in a way, it's covert revenge. It says, I'm going to go out in public and show what a victim I am. And that affixes blame on the person who did this to me. And the problem is that we begin to wear those wounds as a badge. That's who we are. And so the whole victim personality, the victim posture becomes us. And now we have a false self that we're dragging around. And so
that's really sad, because I think our media plays to this as well, and it gets heightened and gets a lot of press coverage. And so people who somehow or other move to a more mature stance in regards to being harmed or injured or wounded often wonder, maybe there's something the matter with them. When in reality, this is what we call a low level of identity, rather than focusing or looking at one's core identity, as a beloved child of God. So it makes a world of difference.
The other way that we can get stuck in the inability to forgive is we become overly attached to fairness. We think that this universe must be fair. And even St. Francis, at the end of his life, he was bothered by a lot of things, and he came to the realization that, I confuse this world with heaven.
Mm.
It's different.
Yes.
So when we do that, when we say this world must resemble heaven, we're getting ahead of the game, and we become disappointed, we become disillusioned, we become upset, and we engage in endless tit for tat. We try and find balance, but we don't. Unending retribution. We end up stuck to the other party, trapped.
Yeah.
It's like, we can't forgive and let that go. So we're very much into the energy and being stuck.
I think a good metaphor is like two drowning persons. They're holding on each other and preventing either person from reaching the surface to get that life-giving breath of fresh air. Just they're basically killing each other.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is encounter evil in this universe is it's sticky. It's like flypaper. It's quicksand. We get stuck. And then we feel that this universe is unfair because, the ultimate unfairness is when we attempt to bring justice, when we act out of revenge, when we attempt to even that scale, we become trapped.
Yes.
And I was like, how does this work? This is not fair. And we start complaining about evil. And we get into the whole issue of the problem of evil. And I think this is an area, certainly as a church, as we engage the culture, is that we need to address is what is the nature of this world and free will, and the idea that this battle for fairness maybe is not what we think it is.
Yes.
Because what we're really trying to do is we're trying to bring about fairness for a false self.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're taking something that is inherently not true, inherently has falsehood in it, and we're trying to make that work.
Yeah.
And of course we become frustrated. And if the only way out of that is, as Scripture tells us over and over, is to find truth with a capital T, and that relationship, which takes us out of this battle of the false self, gives us that supernatural or divine perspective, and that's brings about a whole change. And here's that discussion about the false self, where we're trying to shift out of that battle of false self against false self, where we've become entangled. And forgiveness, this is a very interesting thing. Forgiveness is one of those qualities, the ability to forgive, that allows us to shift into that divine perspective, into our divine self, and move out of that entanglement. And so the working through forgiveness in a conflict situation ends up being a very, very valuable aspect of spiritual formation.
Very much so.
Yeah. And that's what we talk about. Spiritual direction helps us do that. We come to know, as we apologize and forgive and go through this, we end up coming to know. We come into front and center stage with our false self, and those things that we might just leave in the background, and we might never really become aware of who are we being in this life. Now, through conflict, this is the opportunity, this is the plus to conflict, is now it's out there. We're starting to see aspects that we need to let go of, to jettison. And we start to see why we should even engage in spiritual direction and spiritual formation. Now, that may take some time where we go on retreat. We may need the quiet, the stillness in order to step back and see. I think that sometimes maybe the process is to go ahead and get tangled up in life a little bit, live it hard, and get into conflicts, and then go and see what that brings up. Because if we just go into retreat, into solitude, but we don't really have material that we're working with, and it's just a pleasant getaway.
Yes.
That may not give us the top end value. So I think there's there's value in combining these two, conflict resolution with the retreat. There's a series, and this is in Taming the Wolf. I reference him in his book. Lewis Smead, who was a theologian at Fuller, who's a Protestant theologian, wrote a wonderful book called Forgive and Forget, Healing the Hurts We Don't Deserve. And he laid out some steps that we hurt, we hate, we heal, and then we unite. It's a nice model. And he talks about the need to look at how we hurt. And the value of this, how do we hurt? Mild to severe. The degree the hurt was deserved. Did I deserve that? Or that was totally random. The degree to which the hurt was personal. Was it someone I love that caused the hurt? And the degree to which it was intentional. Did someone really target me? Or, was I in the wrong place at the wrong time? The good thing about this model is just that we're getting into the details. We're just asking people to look at it. And throughout the conflict resolution process, that's what we're really doing, is we're trying to supply the questions, the prompts, the guidance that allows people to look at the details so they can go, oh, that's what's there.
Sift through the ashes.
Yeah, exactly. So the crisis of forgiving is when it's personal, unfair, and deep. And then personal, it has to do with face loss. Unfair, once again, we're to that balance. And deep is it pushes us into that victim area. So these create barriers to forgiving. Types of hate, we have passive, passive-aggressive, and aggressive. This gets into the area in which we see hate, and I'm going to deal with this in session number 6, in terms of the way that fear drives aggression, but particularly covert aggression or passive aggression, the hidden aggression. That is a major, major driver of conflict. You can look at, earlier we're talking about conflict within communities. You'll find that in a community you may have people who are experiencing life from the point of view of fear. And to manage that fear and to manage the community around them, they need to engage in aggression in a very covert, hidden way. And so you have the hidden influence, the destructive third party who's upsetting the community. There's ways of transforming that, and that's what we'll get into in week 6. Healing, we separate the truth from the lies, we become present to this world, and we turn from the false self to the divine self. That's pretty self-explanatory. And healing comes to fruition let's go to the next slide. Healing comes to fruition when we unite under an umbrella of grace. I love this. This comes from Smead's work on this. And just a wonderful insight into what we're hoping to achieve. And this is a guidance for a mediator. This helped me formulate the new definition of mediation, in which it's the art of seeking harmony in the unity in the presence of the Holy Spirit. And that's what we're asking. That umbrella of grace is we're really asking the Holy Spirit to be present during this process. And we need to be aware of how we bring that. And that's when we find true healing here.
Yeah. I found, Greg, that the whole forgiveness process is essential for both an individual and for a community to really live in unity and to experience that ongoing dynamic of Christ's healing presence. And one of the things that I like to do when I was in the parish, and I do here with the seminarians, is I invite them into a process of a novena, which is a very traditional Catholic way of praying over a specific period of time, whether it's for a week, 10 days, or all of Lent. And I encourage them to make a novena of forgiveness, where each day they would go through a specific prayer of praying about specific people, both past and present in life, who who for whatever reason may have hurt them, knowingly or unknowingly, and just bringing that in the place of prayer that you're talking about and under the umbrella of grace. It can be so liberating. People have often shared with me that they didn't realize that they were subconsciously holding things against their parents from long ago, or against a third grade teacher, or against a parish priest. Nothing major necessarily, but it was kind of like, that the communication was not clear between them and God and between others. And they experienced this wonderful euphoric release.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I find for myself and those that I work with, I encourage them to follow a specific 4-step process in working through what you've been talking about in terms of forgiveness. And that is, the first step is to really admit the hurt, which you're alluding to, the depth of the hurt.
Yeah.
Kind of like a burn, and seeing that it may go through some very deep layers, not even aware of until days or weeks, maybe even years later.
That's right.
And then when ready, move to the second step, and that is to really admit and work through the admitted resentment. What is it that this individual wants to do to get even? So you're calling it revenge. And to acknowledge that very often for most Christian believers, this is the hardest step.
Yeah.
Because
it seems very unchristian.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to.
So we want to go,
yeah.
no, that's not
right.
fair.
We want to appear nice rather than be real.
That's right.
That's where the false self comes in.
That's right.
And then we're ready. We choose to move to the third stage, and that's where we authentically choose to forgive. We release, or we let go of the blame that we're holding, and then to bless the other person.
Right.
And to me, that's the real gift of what the Ascension is all about, is to let the old new, let the old ascend so that the new can be given, and that we can bless the other person in the sense of wishing them the best on their own journey. And finally, to seek to be reconciled as the Spirit would lead them, so that we're not foisting on anybody. We recognize it's a gift.
Yeah.
That reconciliation is a gift between the two, and it can't be forced, but when it's offered, it can be amazing.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. Excellent approach. Yeah. I think next week we'll take up this slide. There's a fair amount to the whole area of self-forgiveness,
yes.
and the inability to forgive self, which really is rooted in the inability to accept divine forgiveness. And we see this in the culture lining up against the church.
Yeah.
Is basically we see a culture that's awash in transgression and cut off from any grace that can bring about forgiveness of self and self-worth. And when a party gets into diminished self-worth, forgiving is just out of the question. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for attending or viewing. We will provide links for questions later, and links are provided on the download file for the previous sessions. We'll do that each week. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you, Father Clark. I will stop the recording now.